That's great because it is 7 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get started. And we are on Facebook Live. Hi, Facebook. And we are recording, so I think we're all set to go. Well, welcome to Theology on Tap. If you are just catching us, we're doing an open Q&A tonight. You can ask anything you want. And the way Theology on Tap works is, see that number right there? That's the number that you text in questions to. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, which is the only way to do it, you can also put questions in the comments there. Several of you have already texted in questions ahead of time, and we're just gonna put those questions out to our panel of pastors, professors, philosophers, dreamers. Okay, and we're gonna give you our best shot at answering them. So just a little bit about Theology on Tap. We meet once a month. Every other month is this, just any question you have. And then in the other months, every other month, we tackle a particular topic. So in December, very excited, we're going to be talking about miracles. Do miracles happen? Did the ones in the Old Testament and the New Testament happen? Do they happen today? What is a miracle? What constitutes it? And Craig Keener, who is a very smart man who's written a 2-volume, very expensive book on miracles, is going to be joining us. That'll be really fun. So if you want to save the money, not buy the book, come to that. December 16th. It's a Wednesday. We're getting crazy. But before we get started with tonight and kind of get into our ground rules and all that kind of stuff, I want our guests to just introduce themselves. And we've got a little icebreaker question. And we have a new guest with us tonight, Joseph or Joe Yu. But the question for tonight as an icebreaker is, what story or passage or maybe even concept from the Bible is the hardest for you to understand or believe? So a story, or well, Paul's laughing like he didn't know this was coming. He did. A story, a passage, an idea, something from the Bible that's really hard for you to wrap your mind around, or you've wrapped your mind around it, but it's like, dang, it's hard to believe. I believe it because it's in the Bible, but ugh, you know? That is the question on the table, and I'm going to start with Evan M, the senior.
Good. I'm glad I get to go first. That way, nobody else will choose mine.
Okay. And also tell us a little bit about like how you landed with theology,
okay.
where you are, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. We are the oldest Lutheran church in Houston, and so I attended some Houston TOT events and thought, wow, these guys do a really good job of getting young people interested in talking about theology. How can I volunteer? And then I roped in another Evan. I roped in all the Evans I knew and involved in my life to get on board. So anyway, glad to be of help, and we do Houston TOA as well, Theology on Air. That's our podcast. If you haven't subscribed to that, what's wrong with you? Subscribe right now. Go to your phone, subscribe. Okay. Or we can't be friends.
Like every YouTube video now. Hit the bell. Yes. Hit subscribe.
I know. On this button right here.
Right here.
Okay. The saints resurrecting from the dead in Matthew 27.
Yes.
Let me just read it real fast. And 27:51 Matthew. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were also opened, and the many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So there's a lot of debate and controversy on that. It's kind of like thought of as like a zombie type passage, and Mike Licona, I know, has a stance on it, and I don't know, it might be a textual variant or something, and I can blow it off, but it's there. I have to deal with it. It's really weird, and I'm not sure exactly what to take of it. So, Paul, explain it to me later.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It is a really tricky one. Also, it definitely is your little frame from whence that noise is coming. I don't know if it's your kids watching TV or if there's something playing in the background on your computer, maybe, but okay. Letting you know. And I'm telling Evan that partly because I know it's going to bug him until he figures it out because he's our techie kind of guy. Not to add more angst, but anyway. Okay, how about I'm going to just go in the order that I can see you on my screen. So Evan Frisk, you are next.
Hi, Evan Frisk. I'm a philosophy professor at HCC. I'm a congregant with Evan McClanahan, so we attend the same church. I think that I have an answer for it. It's still up in the air. It's a specific paradox to do with the thief on the cross, but not the one that's always talked about. So the thief on the cross is told by Jesus, "Today you will be with me in paradise." But at the same time, in our creed, we say he descended into hell or Hades for for 3 days. And so the question of how can the thief on the cross be with Jesus in paradise while Jesus has descended into Hades? And there are two good answers, and I lean one way as opposed to the other, but it's a nice little paradox that's just thrown me for a loop for a while, especially while becoming more and more devout.
All right. So if somebody wants to know where he stands, you have to submit that question tonight. Okay. By the way, Paul Sloan, looking very sharp. You just got a haircut. I like it. And all this is gone too. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're next. I'm not just saying that just for nothing. You're
I do what
person up.
And to be presentable for Theology on Tap. These aren't working. I teach theology in the New Testament mostly at Houston Baptist University, and teach at our seminary, Houston Theological Seminary. I've been on the panel for a couple years now, a couple-ish years. Started just spoke at one a couple years back, and then joined in a basically permanent basis after that. Yeah, there's a lot of options for what's the most difficult in the Bible to figure out. I mean, the relationship, Christology, the notion of like how Christ is related to God the Father. Just obviously we have Trinitarian language to describe that. And so I do my best to be a thoroughgoing Trinitarian, but like it's just hard to understand. And particularly some of the biblical language about Christ and God that it just is tough to understand. Also, just some of the basic ones like paradox about like election, right? Like how does God's activity interact with how does God's agency interact with human agency? That's kind of a famous one. I feel like I could name like 5 more, but that's enough to get going.
I think it's funny that Evan McClanahan was like zombies, and then Evan Frisk was like, how can he be in hell and saving someone? Paul's like Christology and the doctrine of election. That's great. I love it. Lots of different kinds of answers. Haley, you are next, my dear.
Great. You're gonna love mine even more because I don't have an answer. I like dreaded this question. There's a lot of shit in the Bible I don't get, but probably I don't think I could land on something. Honestly, I've thought about it since you basically all day since whenever you sent that text. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. Probably, I mean, I guess some of I honestly never thought about what Evan Frisk mentioned, so that's interesting. Sarah likes it when stuff like that happens on here. And probably I agree with Paul. Yeah, the whole like, how is God, Jesus and God and all the things, but yeah, I don't know. This isn't something like I spend a lot of time doing, trying to, I don't have like a list of my top 10 things I don't understand in the Bible. And I'm a list maker. I have a lot of lists like that. That's just not one of them. So,
well, why don't you tell
I get
what you do and
for my assignment. Oh, right. That I can answer. I'm Haley Brown, and I'm the director of Gastro Church, which is a cool little food church experiment here in the Houston area. And I have been involved with Theology on Tap for like 2 years maybe, and I'm usually just in charge of like fun things until the pandemic happened, and then I had to start doing this stuff more. So
we didn't force you, but yeah,
that's me.
You all should love Haley because she's the one that brings the beer. So we love her maybe the most. I mean, she does more than just bring the beer. I want to be clear on that, but that is one of the tasks that she has helped us with. So yay, love her. Okay, so I gave you all those chances, Joe, to hear everybody else's before throwing you right into the fire, but you're up.
My name is Joseph, and I was born and raised and ordained in the United Methodist Church. And then in 2019 of July, became an Episcopalian. And I am planning a church called Mosaic in West Pearland with the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. And when that question about something that came to us for the icebreaker, the first story that came to my mind was it's not a concept but a story where Moses had just spoken to God, and Moses agreed to go, and then all of a sudden they're sleeping and the spirit comes and tries to kill Moses. So his wife's like, oh, I'm gonna cut off my son's foreskin and place it on Moses' genital, and we're good.
Yep.
So that's
wait, you forgot the weirdest part about that story. Doesn't he like touch his sandal with it?
My translation says that the wife took the son's foreskin and placed it on Moses' genitals.
Oh.
So, and then I learned recently that feet is a euphemism for sex or genitalia in the Bible. So that's always fun.
I feel like a lot of fetishes.
When Ruth laid at the feet of Boaz, I always thought that was innocent growing up, but not anymore. A lot more happened between Ruth and Boaz. So there you have it.
You are going to fit right in at Theology on Tap because we always somehow devolve to the naughty stuff. So, all right.
We only talk about sex and politics on this show.
So that's true. We do. That's a good one. I have always had that question, by the way, Joe, about that passage. So yes, somebody needs to text it in and make Paul answer that. Okay, so I'm Sarah Stone. I am your MC tonight and most nights that we do Theology on Tap. I am the outreach director for young adults at MDPC. The P is for Presbyterian. So we've got Methodist and Lutheran and Baptist and Episcopal and Presbyterian represented tonight. That's not too bad. I like it. So I have a couple up my sleeve. I thought for sure one of y'all would, what's that? 2 Lutherans, yes. And like 1.5 Methodists. So, and like, yeah, anyway. One thing in the Bible that I've always struggled with is the Nephilim, which are like the sort of men of old or the giants or the sons of the God or the devil, or no one's quite sure, but they weren't good. And were they like half demons? Were they giants? Were they just bad dudes? Like, yeah, we don't have to get into it tonight, but I've always thought that that was sort of fascinating. And somehow they have something to do with like the days that got really bad before Noah. And then maybe Goliath was one, but maybe not. Anyway, so many fascinating things. I don't know what that means when Paul does that, but probably that I'm his favorite. So I'm going to take it. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get going tonight. We've got lots of questions that you guys have submitted, and we have a couple leftover questions from our last one that I promised a few of you that I would try to work in tonight. And so I'm going to keep that promise. The last one we did was how to not divorce your family this Thanksgiving. And it was about how to have charitable conversation about things we really disagree about. Politics, religion, sports. I don't know. I'm assuming people think that about sports. I don't care about sports, but many people do. So we've got some leftover questions from that. But before we get into our questions, just a quick review of our kind of ground rules as we go through the night. Everyone knows these, but it's just nice to be reminded. 3 things we want to keep in mind as we talk with each other. The first is that we are seeking truth and showing grace. Both those things can be true and happening at the same time. Second is we are prioritizing people over positions. We want to build relationships here and build community. And that comes first over being correct about your position. And the third is to show humility in your conviction and listen as much as you speak. Now, that doesn't mean that you can be shy. If I ask a question and no one talks, don't just say, well, we're being so humble. I want you to talk, but I want us to listen to each other and really hear differing opinions, because presumably people in the audience will be somewhere along the spectrum of where we are, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start with one of the leftover ones from last night. I mean, not from last night, from the last Theology on Tap, just so I make sure I get a couple of these in. And I'm going to try to keep our questions kind of mixed and mingled between Bible and theology and culture. We'll see how we go, how we do. Here we go. First question says, it may be okay to disagree about politics, but when it comes to Bible doctrine, I feel like there's less wiggle room. I have a close friend who claims to be a Christian, but believes that all paths will eventually lead to God and that all will be saved. I think that sounds nice, but I think the Bible's, oh, hold on, this is cut off. I think the Bible is clear he's wrong, and it's important. So what do I do? I'm going to copy and paste this and put it in Zoom for you guys, and then I'm going to read it again for our listeners. Sorry, guys, I didn't have things open the right way. Okay, there it is for our guys to listen to or to read again, but I'm going to say it one more time for our listening audience. It may be okay to disagree about politics, but when it comes to Bible doctrine, it feels like there's less wiggle room. I have a close friend who claims to be a Christian, but believes that all paths will eventually lead to God and all will be saved. I think that sounds nice, but I think the Bible's clear he's wrong, and it's important. What do I do? What do you guys have to say to this person? Don't be shy.
Well, my first thought is, I'm not sure I understand, like, what do I do? Like, curious about how to interact with his friend, or is the person now like questioning like his own beliefs? I'm not sure I know like exactly where the motive is here. If it's just in like trying to determine how to interact with someone that believes something different from him. I don't know. Is that what your interpretation was, Sarah?
Because the theme of the last one was how to have those conversations. I think this person's saying, okay, we could disagree about politics. That doesn't seem to matter as much. But when it comes to stuff like this, it feels like it matters more. And so maybe like, how much should I push on what I think is right? That's kind of how I hear it.
That is less controversial than politics. I'm like genuinely shocked. I mean, this, like we're all kind of like hopeful universalists. So
We are?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by hopeful, right? I mean, it's like, do we really want people to like, suffer in hell for all eternity or something like that? I don't think any of us want that per se, but we defend it because we think that's what the Bible says. So, I don't know. I think wouldn't you just say exactly what's said? I think the Bible is clear that you're wrong, but we can remain friends.
Just like that? The Bible's clear, you're wrong. This is why the Thanksgiving is very lean.
Here's the question: Does holding that wrong belief put your own salvation at jeopardy? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I do think it's an errant belief. It could possibly reflect a real lack of appreciation for the nature of God and the judgment of God. It might depend on how it's held. I mean, is that a belief held with the best of intentions, like in Pulp Fiction, with the best of intentions? Remember when Samuel Jackson says that? Anyway, or is it like a real belief that like God is not who he says he is, and it's like a sign of like a deeper rebellion? I think there are different ways that somebody could like be a universalist. It could be a problem. It could be an optimist. I don't know.
I think it touches on the idea of essential doctrine and tertiary doctrines, just what is actually the core of Christianity. I would think whoever asked the question is actually in a better place than most because he's already valuing theology over politics. Great job. You didn't make an idol. But I would think that knowledge is not faith. And just because somebody has some sort of false position in knowledge, it doesn't actually mean that they're not given that same kind of grace that we know saves. I would think that this would be a tertiary doctrine by that kind of measure. I would think that there's nothing wrong in thinking that everybody's going to be saved as far as like your relationship with Christ goes. But I would still hold the contrary view. I would think that hell has to exist because otherwise I don't think that certain people can exist. I actually think that hell is a necessity. Otherwise, because certain people could not exist in the presence of God in that while still surviving as people.
Okay, I see a couple of you going, oh.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with everything Evan Frisk just said, but I think just my thoughts in relation to like how to interact with this person would come just from my own experience and what I try to do, which is to, I think people know that they are loved when they feel heard. And so regardless of what my personal opinions are on anyone's belief about anything, I try to give them, the respect and the time to listen and try to understand why it is that they believe what they believe, which is part of why I continue to be a part of this group because, I think that is important. And I feel like my job here on earth is to help people to feel loved. And if one of those ways is by, making sure they know that they're heard and that I'm interested, that I'm not going to just take what they say and throw it out the window and try to talk at them and convince them of like that they're wrong, because I really have no way of knowing that I'm right. That's just like the right thing to do. Now, I myself have struggled, especially in the year 2020, with finding the balance between listening to something that I do feel so strongly, against, for my own mental health and my own sanity or my soul. That requires further time and reflection. I need to give advice on that. But so far, I have not. I've not found that cutting someone off or telling them that they're wrong and here are the reasons why has ever done anyone any good in terms of building relationships.
Yeah. Oh, you came back. Haley, I was going to tell you that we could hear everything you said and it was beautiful, but your face froze a little bit. Don't worry. It wasn't a like really terrible face or anything that you were making when it happened, but I don't know if you wanted to know that. Anyway, I will say this about this question. I agree 99% with Haley about, you don't just go and say you're wrong. But I do think it's worthy of conversation, especially because the first part of it was that they think all paths lead, or all, did they say religions or paths? The point is, if they really think that all paths will eventually lead to God, there's maybe a danger for them and the people that they talk to that they're not going to be trying to learn more about, know about, and love Christ, right? And that's what we want. We're called, if the Great Commission is to go out and tell people about Christ and baptize them, and this person doesn't think that that's necessary, and they're not going to also then be doing that, or think it's fine to be Muslim or Buddhist or atheist or whatever, then that's something I think we have to speak to. But yes, kindly and without like friendship being on the line. You could be like, well, I disagree, but we can continue being friends, of course.
A practical thing you could do that I've found is interesting is each prescribe a book for the other, and then you can now give that, so like just give, say like, hey, give me your best case for universalism. I'll give you my best case for not universalism, and let's read them and talk together.
I like that.
Do people actually read books to defend the idea that all paths will eventually lead to God, or is that just something people kind of like want to believe? I mean, are there actual defenses of that? I mean that in a real way.
Definitely.
Is that a defense? It seems like just kind of a.
There are books written to defend it, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know their titles, but
I'm thinking of the phrase like all paths eventually lead to God. It just sounds kind of new agey to me. But when I say I would say someone's wrong, I mean, like, I don't know why is that in and of itself wrong to do? Like, isn't it assumed they think you're wrong? I mean, it's just being honest, I mean, it's not insulting. It's
Well, if you don't give them the time of day because you think they're wrong, then that's insulting.
Well,
sure, the act in of itself.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say the act in of itself of saying like I don't agree with you and I think you're wrong. I don't think is insulting, but not be.
Oh, did we lose?
Why it is that they have come to think what they think? Yeah, I think that's insulting.
I give people the time. I'd give them 20 hours if they would give it to me. I usually just don't find that to be the case if I'm talking. Well, that's another story. But sure, if they wanted all day to tell me all the reasons universalism was true, I'd be like, honey, I'm going to be late for dinner. I got a more important conversation. So, yeah.
Evan's tolerated my soul sleep mantra for the last 6 years or so.
But no more. I've reached my limit on that.
Oh my gosh. All right. I think we're going to move on because I think we all agree you can disagree with someone charitably and that this is a pretty important one, but not enough to like end a friendship or anything like that. Okay. This next one, this will be interesting. This is just kind of religious philosophy. So it says, what are the key differences between the Eastern Taoist and Western Christian perspectives on good versus evil? So I realize Eastern has way more than just Taoism, but that's what this person asked about. So what are the key differences between Eastern/Taoist and Western Christian perspectives on good versus evil is the question. And I love this question so much. So anyone that wants to chime in, holler. And
So-
also somebody on Facebook said to say hello to Joseph's kid. Oh, that's funny.
So
Nathaniel.
Taoism is actually a very clear and obvious topic in C.S. Lewis's book, Abolition of Man. So if you want to see a really good comparison between Taoism and Christianity, it's an easy place to go. It's about 60 pages, and I have free PDF links. If you want to be able to read it free, you don't need to go buy it. Figure out how to contact me. I'll send you a free copy of it. He makes a lot of comparisons. So they do have very similar ethic structures. The Tao is the path or the way. And so it has obvious analogies to Jesus saying things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The big difference is going to be that evil is going to be more rooted in nature in Taoism, and evil in Christianity is going to be more rooted in a kind of spirituality instead. So that when Taoism talks about going against the Tao, it means things that literally lead to death. It means that you're not aggressive when you should be, but you're not passive when you should be. Christianity just doesn't usually use those kinds of languages. It's not the way we describe things at the very least. So that there's a number of different analogies that could be made. Neither are actually committed to evil being a real tangible thing. And neither of them are limited in spiritual scope either to what they mean by good and evil. So there's a lot of commonalities, and driving at the differences is actually kind of difficult.
Sarah, why did you love this question so much?
Well, partly I think I know who it's from, and it's an interesting exploration in that person's faith journey. But when COVID kind of got really rolling and the lockdowns were happening, Tim Keller put something out that I watched that I thought was really fascinating, where he kind of looked at different big sections of religions, like kind of Eastern, Western, and maybe atheism. Anyway, and he just talked about good and evil, and he made some cool distinctions, like basically that, especially in Eastern religions, there is no such thing as unjust suffering, because you've either pulled it onto yourself because of karma. I'm still with you guys, right? Okay, I see Evan moving. I thought I froze. You either have brought it on yourself, or your family has brought it on you, or you haven't sort of disassociated, like in Buddhism. Not disassociated. What's the word I'm looking for? Where you disconnect, or you just, to detach. Detachment is like the big thing. Detach from relationships so that you don't depend on them for your emotional wholeness or whatever. But in Christianity, there is unjust suffering, and we see it with Jesus. He suffers when he didn't deserve to suffer, and we can take comfort in that. Anyway, that came to my mind when I heard the question. But I just love comparing religions and thinking about them. So I think this kind of stuff is cool, especially thinking about good versus evil. Would you guys say that Taoists even believe in good and evil? Because we believe definitely that there is a source for good, and the evil is sort of a parasite that sits beneath that. It's like the absence of it.
Yeah, evil is evil really isn't bad. Evil is a necessary thing. So the way that they'll describe things is like when you're hungry, and one day, or you're hungry one day, but that means something doesn't get to be your food, and then the next day you finally get to eat, but that means you've consumed something else has to die for you. They'll just kind of agree that this is the natural course of nature. That the goods for some end up in evils for other, and that's where you get the yin yang symbol from, where it's all kind of, it blends, and they're both complementary in that way. And Christianity doesn't assume that section at all.
Yeah, I remember when Jerry Walls came and spoke way back in the day, like when our first year of Theology on Tap, he was talking about suffering, and he said one of the big distinctions that Christianity offers is that we don't have this dualistic idea where good and evil are just as powerful, and just as sort of weighty, and will, sort of perpetually be at war or in sync with each other, that one is greater than the other and one will win the day. I remember him.
There's a good analogy.
Umbrella. What's that?
There's a good analogy for this, which is existence and non-existence. Non-existence doesn't have to be real. By definition, it doesn't exist for existence to happen. And so we can make the same argument for good and evil, where you can have good without evil. That part's fine. Taoism just it claims the opposite. They're very dualistic in that, even if it's still very, it still has a lot of other commonalities, even if they don't mean something by evil as like some demonic spirit or anything like that. They still end up revolving on that dualism for whatever reason.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on this question, or maybe just in general about sort of good and evil?
I was gonna say, as an Asian person, I'm just kidding. I grew up in a shelter home. I don't know anything about the Asian philosophy.
That's amazing. I'm triggered.
Well, I'll just say that I went to college with a Taoist, and he was one of the most wonderful human beings that I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. Just the biggest, kindest, most wonderful person. And he came to church with me often, all the time. And yeah, I like hadn't thought about him until I saw this question today. And I was like, dang, what does that guy do?
One of our
well, not impossible, but a lot harder to.
Haley, I'm sorry, we're struggling with your connection. You keep freezing up a little bit, but we understand that you have a Taoist friend who's awesome and lovely. Okay. One of our viewers who has been on the podcast a few times, Ted Wright, said that in Taoism, evil is Maya, an illusion, which makes me think of like Christian scientists or other people that believe in pain or evil being an illusion, which is, of course, antithetical to Christian beliefs, right? Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about a kind of monistic version of Hinduism that uses the word Maya in particular. Very clear analogies between the two. But yeah, evil is supposed to be kind of a perspective. And without the perspective, evil doesn't exist.
All right. Any other thoughts? Good and evil, Eastern, Western? Do we win? I'm kidding.
West for the win.
I don't know if West for the win, but I do like Christianity. I'm a big fan. So,
Middle East for the win.
We are going to move on, but of course, if any other thoughts come to you, throw them out there. Let's see. I'm going to pick something. We have a couple controversial ones tonight, but here we go. This person writes, which I'm happy they're listening to the podcast. This is what it says. In a recent episode of Theology on Air, someone brought up the difference between traditional views of marriage and being labeled, quote, homophobic. Y'all know I'm coming for you. One person on the panel seemed to think that that was an appropriate label for a traditionalist. Can you talk about that a little bit more? It seems to me that thinking something is counter to biblical teaching doesn't make you afraid of it. I think they're referring to the phobic piece there. So I'm going to put this in our chat box and read it one more time for our listeners. In a recent episode of Theology on Air, which you should all go listen to, someone brought up the difference between traditional views of marriage and being labeled homophobic. One person on the panel seemed to think that was an appropriate label for a traditionalist. Can you talk about that a little bit more? It seems to me that thinking something is counter to biblical teaching doesn't make you afraid of it. What are y'all's thoughts?
I remember that. Let me just say quickly, I in my previous church body, which I guess was far more progressive leaning than my current church body, there were all these debates that were going on. There were these real kind of theological disagreements. And I remember the other side, I guess the more progressive side, was always essentially trying to implicate or indict me of being fearful. And I always resented that. I felt it was intellectually dishonest and emotionally manipulative, and basically abusive. Not that I cry abuse, but I felt that it was a tactic to say, well, you just don't agree with us because you're afraid of change. And it was a way of undercutting my argument. No, I don't agree with you because I think the clear teaching of the Bible is this. And so I think that labeling people as afraid is hugely pejorative, and it isn't helpful at all. And it may not be that they're afraid at all. And then the word phobia really speaks to, I do not know about the Tejano music.
Sorry.
Unless it's my piano, my kids playing piano in the background.
No, it is not your children playing piano. It sounds like we're at a Tex-Mex restaurant. It is Tejano music, 100%.
That is, it must be picking it up in the air. That is so weird.
In the air, just like vibes.
I mean, I don't know. You know how sometimes like an antenna will like, is it, y'all can really hear it though?
Yeah. Haley's vibing some Tejano right now.
Okay, I'll be.
It's fine. It's actually adds.
I'm about to go get a beer.
It's like a jaunty soundtrack to what you're saying.
Corona, Haley.
Yeah,
Dos Equis.
Dos Equis.
I
Yes.
actually stopped for a second there, Evan, and I was.
Anyway, phobia is an irrational fear. It's not just fear. Like if you are arachnophobic or whatever, you have an irrational fear of spiders. And what I don't like about the word homophobic is that it implies this irrational fear of gay people. And if I believe in a traditional view of marriage, it's not because I have an irrational fear of other human beings. It's because I have a conviction about the normalcy of the married couple as one man and one woman. So with that, I'll mute so you don't hear the music.
Hopefully I'm gonna be stable here. If I'm not, Sarah, just tell me that I should while I'm talking. But yeah, this quote is referencing me and Evan McClanahan on the Blackboard Business like 2 weeks ago. And I think like this phobic is just what's it called? I can't think of the word that describes when something's just about words. Semantics?
Semantic.
Yeah. Because yes, phobia gets added to a lot of things as a way of describing like a fear of said thing. However, homophobia is like meant to pull together a wide range of negative views. And so, when homophobic or call someone homophobic, it's a better way of putting it. I don't think they're saying you have an irrational fear of gay people.
Haley.
You have a negative view of homosexuality.
Haley.
Yes.
I'm going to stop you for a second.
Sarah.
I'm wondering if maybe we stop your video, at least just try that, because you're freezing a lot. And I think what you're saying really matters to answering this question. So I'm going to, oh, you did it. Keep talking and let's see if that helps.
Yeah, I don't know why my internet is unstable, because I literally do this all the time. I did like close out a normally I try to watch Facebook for you with people commenting, and I close that out to see if it helps some. So far, am I freezing when I talk?
No, this seems like it's better. And by the way, somebody on Facebook is saying, just to add to what you're saying, they said, is homophobia a misnomer like xenophobia, not meaning fear, but oppression/bigotry? Sounds like maybe that's the track you're going on. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that was what was happening at the end of that exchange, because we were talking about that Ed Markey's tweet about the originalism being sexist and racist and homophobic, and I said that it was, and Evan said that it wasn't, and then at the very end made a comment about that just because he had a more traditional view of marriage didn't mean that he had a fear of gay people. And no, I do not think that Evan McClanahan has a fear of gay people, although I might not know him well enough to be able to make that distinction. I'll just take him at face value when he says that he's not afraid of them. You seem to be just fine around Dylan the other day. So I hope that like clears some of that up a little bit more. Obviously, if there's a lot that we could dive into in terms of our feelings on homosexuality. But as far as the homophobic comment, yeah, I was not trying to imply that Evan McClanahan was afraid of gay people.
This is interesting because so maybe we can just agree for the remainder of this question that the phobic part is probably a bad way of saying it, but what you're really trying to get at is this idea of bigotry, like the person on Facebook said. Would you agree with that, Haley, that when somebody has a certain stance that it implies some kind of oppression or bigotry, maybe not irrational fear?
I don't know that I would feel comfortable saying that phrase exactly. I'd have to think about it more, but probably.
Okay. Evan or anybody else, do you want to maybe respond to that? Because I think there's still a disconnect there, right? Or maybe not.
I feel like I've talked too much, so I want to make sure other people can chime in. But I
It's fun when you talk.
And the music.
okay. Well, again, I just I resent, I guess I would say, the idea that the reason that I don't agree is because I'm afraid. It's a kind of an Orwellian way of poisoning the well or setting the stage for me to fail. There's really no way to overcome a personal shortcoming I have, like being afraid. There's no reason, there's no scripture, there's nothing I can do. If the reason that I hold my view is because I am personally afraid, I have the personal emotional weakness of being afraid, then it doesn't matter what argument I make. It doesn't matter what I bring to the table. And so to me, it's a really, I have to say, I feel like it's a devious way to not listen to me, to not respect the arguments that I or people like me, I mean, the millions of people who hold my view would make. It's just a way of, it really, what's the logical fallacy? It's against the man.
Ad hominem.
It's an ad hominem attack. I'm not afraid. At all. I'm not.
I
I'm not
just
afraid.
said that I don't think you're afraid. Like,
And I don't think I'm a
what...
bigot either. I don't think I'm a bigot either. And I don't think I'm oppressive either. If that's the case, then you know. Anyway, again, it's this. It would be those that fall into the same category, though. If you call someone a bigot, that poisons the well. That's an ad hominem attack. If you say that they're,
it's not making an argument.
Yeah,
just calling a person a bigot isn't an argument. You still have to justify that position on a certain basis. So I mean, yeah, just to jump in for this, also for the sake of the Tejano music.
Oh my goodness, this is gonna so bug Evan. You guys continue.
Yeah, I'm not much else to say except that both. I mean, you just have to argue a case. It's not, I think, obvious that holding a traditional stance on the definition of marriage or whatever on sexuality is by definition bigoted. You'd have to argue that case, and you'd have that's it. You'd have to argue the case.
I'd like to comment that our culture in general likes to use these kind of like emotionally reductive attacks often. So conservatives like to call liberals snowflakes as a way to say that they're sensitive and that they are letting their emotions get the best of them. But liberals do the same things as the conservatives. It's just kind of a cheap tactic that both sides use all the time. I think that's probably what the word homophobic meant in the beginning. Is it was one of those little cheap attacks. I don't know if it works that way anymore. I think it's just way easier than saying anti-homosexual relations. Nobody wants to use that mouthful. Instead, it's just
yeah,
easy.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's way easier just to say homophobia, it's a common tactic to kind of reduce someone's opinions to mere emotions, and both sides do it. Like let's just be honest. Like if we wanted to have a real constructive conversation, we just wouldn't reduce anything to emotions. And I wouldn't think that neither Evan nor Haley was probably doing this at the last podcast.
No, I mean, that's what I was trying to give context to everyone. So like, if we're going to talk about homosexuality, I feel like that's a different conversation. But I feel like the question here and what we're talking about was the exchange between me and Evan. And it was literally in response to a tweet that someone else made. And obviously I haven't spoken to Ed Markey. I may even be getting his name wrong. That dude that tweeted the thing about originalism. I think what I interpreted from that tweet was that he was pointing out the problems in the Constitution as it was originally written and implying that it didn't think about, or it wasn't written in such a way that would be friendly to people who are homosexuals and people who were not white, and I can't remember what the other one was. What was it? It was, and people who were not men. Like his tweet was saying that originalism was racist, sexist, and homophobic. And that's what I interpreted that to mean, which is something that I agreed with. And so that therein lies where all of that came from and the context for this conversation.
All right, I think I'm going to move us on. If somebody actually has a question about where we stand on the issue of homosexuality, we can go there, but that's not what this question was. So I'm going to move us on. This one just came in. I typed it into my computer. Somebody just texted this in. This is a great question. The person says, I personally try not to support TV, movies, or artists that promote or irresponsibly show violence against women or rape. Looking at you, Game of Thrones. How are we supposed to interpret and read the violence against women and sexual assault in the Bible? If it were any other piece of media, I wouldn't read or watch it. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the text. I don't know why I say this every time. Like, you guys know the drill. There it is. I'm going to read it one more time. Excuse me. I personally try not to support TV, movies, or artists that promote or irresponsibly show violence against women or rape. I'm looking at you, Game of Thrones. How are we supposed to interpret and read the violence against women and sexual assault in the Bible? If it were any other piece of media, I wouldn't read or watch it. We haven't never gotten this question before.
Sarah,
Bible is not a children's book.
Sarah, you copy pasted the wrong question into the chat.
I did?
Yeah, I was going to say that as well.
The short answer would be just that the Bible's testimony about this violence doesn't glorify it. It's in there as an example of a terrible thing that happens. Whereas not all the time, but often in whatever TV shows and movies, even when the narrative is attempting to show that it's a bad thing that's happening, it still does it in a way that's visually enticing often. Not because that it's actually is, but just because you're watching sort of sexual movements or something like that. And so even when the point of the show is to like say, look, this is bad, it's still like they're like, it's two attractive people who are like forcefully having sex basically, and it doesn't just like it's just jarring. So I'd say that, and then oftentimes the show isn't trying to paint it in a bad light. Sometimes it's just like aggressive violence and it's glorified, right? So I'd say that the goals of the narratives are quite different, and that the goals of the narrative are quite different. That's it. I'm sure there's much more to be said. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to talk too much tonight. Yeah. I remember. Go ahead. You want to?
I was going to ask about something like maybe it's a stupid question, but like 50 Shades of Grey. I've never read the book or watched it because that's like now that's a popular, I mean, like best-selling book, right? So it's a popular book that ties those two things together, but apparently I don't know. There's like consent, so it's all okay. I don't know.
I'd want to add one thing about that. If you're a man or woman who's been sexually assaulted and reading those stories is really tough for you, like, yeah, don't read them, and that's okay. Like, I don't. That should be said.
I appreciate that, Paul. That's good. Yeah, I think back to being what came to mind. It didn't have to do with violence against women, but it mirrors this, is being in like high school and watching footage of the Holocaust and just thinking how awful it was. And the reason why it hit me that it was so awful is because it was real. It was pictures. I mean, it was pictures of the dead bodies, piles of bodies. And I remember just like looking away and my heart hurting. I think that's supposed to be what happens to us when we read about this in the Bible, because it's history. And if you're reading it as history and you're seeing how much the Lord hates it and detests it, it tells you what happened in history and about God's character. Again, I agree with Paul. If that's triggering, and not the joking way of using that word, but legitimately triggering, there's so many other good parts of the Bible to read. And I think of things like Psalms, where it doesn't talk about those things explicitly, but it gets really mad at your enemies. You can still read those. But that would be my.
Let me just say too that the Bible's law against rape is stronger than our own law. right? So rape is a death penalty offense in the Old Testament, and it's not in Houston, Texas, so, or anywhere in America, as far as I'm aware. Maybe there are some cases of it, but so actually, the Bible takes a stronger stance than our own civilization on or our own context on crimes against women. Now,
unless you're a king.
Yeah, I was going to say people will make exceptions, or they'll talk about the woman raped in the field and things like that. So those are maybe bigger things to unpack. So there would be certain conditions that would have to be met for the death penalty to take into effect. Who's the king you're speaking of? Was it David and Bathsheba?
Yeah. Well, there was Absalom. No, was it Absalom? No. Absalom's half brother that raped Tamar. David's
Judah.
son. I can't remember his name.
Didn't Judah rape Tamar?
Oh, yeah. I went to seminary though, and then I'm under the way I read it. The way I read it was that David forced himself upon Bathsheba. Used his authority as a king and made this happen, and Bathsheba had no choice but to follow along because her and her husband's life might have been in danger if she refused.
Well, I will say, I might say that the death penalty was in effect for that because David and Bathsheba's child paid the price for their indiscretion.
For his indiscretion. If we're
yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of things we don't know about that story. I mean, was she bathing on the roof to get his attraction? But now I'm blaming the victim. So, but people do look at that story and will say it takes two to tango kind of thing.
I'm not an architect, but I have a hard time believing that a bathtub is placed on a roof of a home. And again, I might be putting way too much reading into putting my own whatever into it, but I always felt like David was a peeping Tom and kind of saw what he saw that wasn't supposed to see. And from the palace, probably had to look into windows of homes and, instead of making him look like a peeping Tom, perhaps having Bathsheba bathe on the roof sounded more appropriate to save the king's honor rather than saying, hey, this dude was kind of a pervert.
Well, we know he did a lot of bad stuff because then he followed it up by murdering. And even when he looked at her, regardless of where she was or what she was doing, he looked past all the available women that he had right there that he was married to. So yeah, it was bad no matter how you slice it. That's for sure.
And it was Amnon and Tamar, and that one of David's sons that raped his half sister.
But is that
my seminary degree does pay off?
And Google. Tell me you didn't Google that, Jung.
No, I was looking through the Bible app. 2 Samuel 13, Amnon and Tamar.
Okay. The Google of Bible. Okay. What were we gonna say, Evan?
Well, just to Paul's point, I don't know that's. Whenever I read that story, or I think we're all supposed to be disgusted at that story. So I think it's told in a way that doesn't, in any way glorify it. Yeah, but I would say that. I do think it's a good question, but I think again, it's if there are any stories in the Bible that say that this is okay, I don't know of them. So. Even David and Bathsheba, their child was God. I mean, if anything, you could look at the story about David and Bathsheba, go, God is a horrible God. He killed their kid. What did their kid have to do with it?
And then also, I think, when Amnon was lusting after his half sister, he looked at his dad and be like, oh yeah, if dad can do it, I can do it too. So I think had ripple effects on his children too, the ones that didn't die.
So it sounds like the big distinction we're making is that when we read it in the Bible, there's a very clear message that it is abhorrent and evil and that God hates it. Whereas when we watch it on movies and TV fiction, there's some kind of glorification, even when it's trying to show a scene of evil. It's salacious and yeah. Does anybody else have anything we want to say about that? It's a great question, whoever put that in. I don't know that person's number, so good job.
As a kind of parallel, because my wife won't watch, for example, Breaking Bad because, not really because of this reason, but people are like, oh, it glorifies drugs and meth. I'm like, it doesn't glorify drugs and meth. Those people are like horrible and wicked and evil. Nobody would ever want to get in the drug trade, except for all the money they make. Nobody would ever want to get in the meth trade after watching Breaking Bad, you know.
I agree with that, man. I watched that. Not that I was ever tempted,
But that cube of money in the storage unit in the end is, I do covet that a little bit. That's impressive. So.
All right, so we've tackled sex and meth, and the night is young. We're only halfway through. Here we go. Okay, so this next question, the question is short, but I have gone ahead and put the verses in that the person references. So the question just says, is social justice compatible with Exodus 23:2 and Leviticus 19:15? Is social justice compatible with these two verses? So I feel like we kind of need to know what the verses are. So I went ahead and looked them up for you guys. The Exodus passage talks about not giving a false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked person to be a malicious witness. You shall not follow the crowd in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to join together with a crowd in order to pervert justice. And here's the key phrase, nor shall you show favor to a poor person in his dispute. Leviticus 19:15 is shorter. It says, you shall not do injustice in judgment. You shall not show partiality to the poor, nor give preference to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. So again, the question is about social justice. Is it compatible with these verses that talk about not showing partiality to the poor, the marginalized, being fair? I'm going to put it in the chat. But I'm curious about y'all's thoughts. And yeah, we're probably going to have to define social justice a little bit.
So I know there's a friend of Evan and I's, Joel McDermott, that is is very conservative, but was kicked out of his conservative circles because of his position on social justice. And he argues from a position of scripture alone that there's got to be a lot of social justice that is often missed in modern politics in particular. Things like gleaning the fields so that the poor were free to eat any food that grew by the road. If you had a field, anything that you could grab while you were standing on the road was yours. And you couldn't restrict that. There's no provision for a standing army in the Old Testament. So he's very literal in that category and says that there should be no standing army in the United States and that money should go back to the people. He ends up having a number of views that we call liberal and he calls Old Testament. A really interesting perspective at the very least.
But also, it seems like if you only present one verse from an entire chapter and says, that's kind of defeat the point, because it seems like, and the version I read from the Common English Bible, and Leviticus 19:15 specifically talks about a legal case. And in that sense, yes, when you're arguing a legal case, you should not show favoritism based upon someone's status. You should look at the evidence and whatnot. So yeah, absolutely. When you're judging a case between two parties, you should be partial. But I don't think that specifically Leviticus 19:15 is in context with this person is asking. It's like just taking one verse. There's that verse in Luke chapter 4 where it says, "If you bow down to me, everything I have will be yours." And you're like, yeah, that's a good verse until you realize it's Satan saying that. So it's kind of like, yeah, let's not focus on one verse and plan our whole entire argument around it. You had to read what's before and what's after it and read it in context. So in the way that it's written, in the way I read it, in a legal case, yes, absolutely, you should not show favoritism. But, call me a social justice or a snowflake, whatever, but I do believe that God has a heart, particularly for the poor and the vulnerable and the oppressed and the marginalized, and we are called to continually care for them. I mean, last week's passage was Amos, the famous, I hate your songs, I hate your festivals. Basically, God saying, if you can't show justice towards your people, especially the poor and the vulnerable, then I don't want your worship. It's empty, it's wasted. So, I don't know. The fact that he or she used that one verse I think that verse goes deeper, and I'm going to go to Exodus 23 now.
Actually, I really appreciate that distinction. I hadn't really thought about that. That's a legal, in a legal case, don't do this. I mean, not that it has no bearing on social justice, but yeah, that's good. I like this guy. What do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I agree with Joseph. I mean, the case in Leviticus is clearly talking about a legal case being argued in a court case. So I mean, the rest
And
of it.
same thing with Exodus 23. It says, nor the last one in this verse, nor shall you show favor to a poor person in his dispute. Again, it's talking about a legal case. So if you're going to be a partial judge, when someone comes up to you, look at the facts and judge fairly. But outside of the courtroom, let's stand with the poor, because that's what I believe we're called to do.
Do you think there's so we all agree that in a legal case there shouldn't be any special preference or special treatment, but do you think that you can take any of that idea and apply it to social justice, where we know that the Lord loves, and Jesus particularly talks a lot about those on the margins, the widow and the orphan, but is there anything that we can say biblically to social justice proponents that maybe want to give I'm trying to think of how to say this, like unequal
legal protection
priority? What's that?
I thought you were going to go the court case route, because that was
no, I'm trying to get outside of the court case route.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Just think about social justice. We're for it. Justice. We want there to be justice, social justice. But I'm just
I mean, yes, I think there is. I mean, in go back to Joseph's point about the or I think it was Joseph who said it, or maybe it was
the edges of the field.
The edges of the field. Was that Evan who said that?
Yeah, that was Jeff.
Anyway, I mean, that goes to the so-called ownership of the field, and that God tells them quite clearly, like, the field doesn't really belong to you, it belongs to me. And so consequently, I tell you how to use it. And so therefore you don't glean everything, what falls on the ground or what grows on the edges, that's for others. And it's a command that you give it to the poor. And there's a command in even the Old Testament community, there should be no poor in your midst. Of course, that's describing an ideal state. But it's obviously it's the ideal that they're supposed to pursue. There should be no poor in your midst. And as Joseph said, and Evan, I think, said or implied, it is basic to the prophetic indictment of the people, which is that whenever the prophets critique the people, it is because they have practices that hurt the poor. And that makes God angry. So yeah, this is an easy both and. I mean, this seems very obviously easily a both and. Yeah, in court cases, you don't show partiality, and you weigh evidence, and you do all that stuff. But that you attempt to build a society that would work for everyone, and that and of course in Leviticus the notion is that the land of Israel belongs to God and not the people. It's only really on loan to the people, as it were. And so because it really belongs to God, God decides what to do with XYZ, and his goal is that there be no poor. Mm-hmm. Then you'd have to extrapolate from that to then our own civil law, which is a different question, but is still a relevant one, I suppose.
So, by the way, now I hear an echo, but do y'all hear?
Hey, at least there's no Tejano.
Okay. That's so weird. So I do think you, sir, you mentioned like, well, we have to describe or define social justice. And I think that's true. Because when people use that today, I think they bring into it all kinds of assumptions and presuppositions about, well, when I say social justice, I just mean that there should be equity or equality for certain persons and so on and so forth. But it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it feels like it's trying to accomplish much more than that. So if you look at, for example, the question of race in America, it often feels as though to be white is to be a white supremacist, unless you're an anti-racist, for example. I mean, let's just jump the shark here, right? Let's just go all the way. So sometimes it feels as though you are guilty before any evidence is weighed against you. That's the nature of oppressor dynamics, or what people call social justice. So to exist in a certain way is to be guilty of what you are already accused of. And so I would say that's not biblical justice. That's not social justice. The idea of social justice biblically would be that the evidence should be weighed against you, and then you should be. So if you act like a racist, if you speak like a racist, if you make social media posts like a racist, then you might be a racist. But that shouldn't be assumed about you because of the color of your skin or something to that effect. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what I don't know if that's what the questioner is sort of, getting at, is the idea that just because a person is poor doesn't mean that they're right. Likewise, just because a person is a person of color doesn't mean they're right either. And just because a person is a person of power doesn't mean that they're wrong. And just because a person is rich doesn't mean that they're wrong. What is the evidence in the case? If you're going to call me a name, bring me evidence. If you don't have evidence, then I have a good biblical reason to deny the charge.
Sorry, my wife just texted me. I read it and it was funny. But I was also,
Prove it. Read the text.
I'm actually drinking her beer, and she says, "You're not drinking mine, are you?" And I was like, "No." So I'm caught, and I'm just trying to figure out how to respond to her. But
you just tell her your words work, and then everything is permissible.
Just say what's mine is yours, vice versa.
No. Yeah, what's mine is hers, but what's hers is not necessarily mine. So, anyway, now if she sees this, I'm going to be in bigger trouble. So let's just keep going. So Richard Rohr, in his book it's called Jesus' New Plan for the World, wrote something that is stuck with me. It stuck with me. And I actually had Haley's uncle read it, and we talked about it because I was so fascinated by him and his way of thinking. But Richard Rohr talks about when we build a bridge, generally we don't start from the middle. We always have to pick one side to start the building of the bridge from. And he argues that Jesus is calling us, his followers, to start from the side of the poor. Because if we start building the bridge from the side of the rich, we might not want to extend all the way. And so is a poor person right just because they're poor? Yeah, no, but at the same time, I feel like we're called to stand with those who can't stand on their own, and we're called to be a voice for those who can't. Not even be the voice. We should make way so that they can voice for themselves their struggles and whatnot. So, I guess the word I'm looking for is there should be a partiality towards the people that God tends to care for the most. And for me, throughout the scriptures, it's always been the poor. It's the least of these. I mean, I think next week's reading is not this week, but the following week is Matthew 25, right? Goats and sheep. So, and that story ends with, whatever you did for the least of this, you did for me. Whatever you didn't do for the least of these, you haven't done for me. So, I'm going to stop because I'm going to keep babbling.
I wouldn't say that Jesus cares the most for any one economic group. Jesus ministered to rich people as well. And this week is the parable of the talents. And the one who took his one talent and buried it in the sand is called wicked and lazy. So I again, there is no group of people that are the poor that are all the same. So our church supports Christian Community Service Center here in Houston. What do they do? Why do we support them? Why do I not give money to poor people, if you will, when they come to my church door and ask for it? Because I don't know them. And this has been a revolution in charity the last 20 or 30 years. Go ask anyone that runs a charity like CCSC. They're all doing this now. What do? They have a file on people who show up. They get to know them. They'll give them something for free the first time, but the next time they'll know that they came once before. They'll know if they're scamming and working deals with other, charity organizations. They will get them the help that they need. Do they need job training? Do they need clothes for an interview? Do they need computer skills? Do they need I already said job training. You get the idea. They help people where they are. So I just reject this concept that there is this group of people called the poor that God loves more than other people. Jesus calls that person in that parable wicked and lazy. So we have to deal with that. There are rich people who are wicked and lazy, and there are poor people who are wicked and lazy. But the idea, I'm just pushing against the idea that because you are one thing or another, that puts you in a certain category. It doesn't.
Let me follow Evan real quick, Joe, before you jump in. Because I'm going to push back against Rohr just a little bit as well. So in the analogy, and this is where I think that we need to change the analogy for the sake of perspective, of the rich being on one side, the poor being on another, and we're trying to build a bridge between the two. The bridge here is still going left and right, and we're still therefore of the world. So one of the reasons I like McDermott so much is because when we talk about social justice, the question whose social justice is asked. And I think that in Rohr's analogy, it's the poor's social justice that's focused on, when really the answer for Christians should be it's God's justice that matters here. And it's not poor justice or rich justice that matters. It's God's justice. It doesn't need to be so much a bridge as it is a ladder where we need to be able to build each other up, and lift each other in that way, as opposed to try to pour our wealth from our right pocket into our left pocket. It just doesn't seem to be advantageous to anybody at that point.
By the way, what are these passages you guys keep referring to? Like, well, next week's reading is like we're all on the same reading. Like
Liturgical calendar.
Huh?
The liturgical calendar.
RCL, the Revised Common Lectionary. We're in year A. We're moving through Matthew. Next year will be the year of Mark. The next year will be the year of Luke. So yeah. So I'm guessing, since he mentioned Matthew in the 20s, we're both on the RCL. The Lutherans, Episcopals, Presbyterians. Well, some Presbyterians, obviously not all.
Apparently the good ones, not me. I'm like a
Well, I mean, like the 6 like liturgical churches tend to all be on the Revised Common Lectionary. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we don't do this sermon series business.
Yeah. Someone else watching was probably wondering too. They're like, am I missing kind of like worldwide?
Yes.
Have you never been to Catholic Mass either?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that I know that they follow a specific calendar of readings.
Well, like in the pews, they have like you can see, you could like flip through and see what the scripture reading 3 years from now is going to be on December 3rd or whatever. Like,
okay.
I need to unless Sarah's going to move us along. Like, sorry, Evan, I got to go back to one thing you said in that chunk of stuff a few minutes ago about you not giving stuff to people who come to your church because you don't know them, like poor people. I'm assuming, because I've worked at several churches, I know people come to the door often asking for things, like sharing their stories, needing gas money or food or like something for a hotel. And at every church that I've ever been at, there were provisions and things to hand out to these people to fill whatever those needs are, regardless of whether or not anyone knew them. And I don't know, I just have a hard time hearing that like there's a church here in Houston that doesn't do that.
Wow. Well, let's make it personal, Haley. Actually, we do have provisions and we do hand things out to people, but no, I don't hand out cash because you're not supposed to hand out cash. That's not recommended by charities. Lord of the Streets, specifically, for example, a few years ago, wrote in the Houston Chronicle not to give beggars money. It is literally the worst thing that you can do, because it enables them to live a life on the street that is not good for them. And so all the efforts that are made to get people off the streets, getting them ID, getting them shelter, getting them into housing, et cetera, those are all thwarted when we enable people to live a destructive life on the streets. So I'm just telling you what charities have told me. Do not give people who beg for money.
Well, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, I don't think I agree with anything you just said then either. But like, you don't have to give them cash. I mean, you can give them gift cards to a hotel stay, or gift cards to a place to eat, gift cards to the grocery store. I mean, there's ways to, or take them to those places yourself. Like I've done that. I've given people rides to the bus station, and then paid for their bus ticket. Like, it's not just a thing of like giving someone cash. Although I also like, part of my problem with the rest of what you said there is that, like, I feel like you're putting anybody that, I mean, first of all, like there's a difference between poor people and homeless people, or people who live on the streets. And I feel like you just put everyone into like one big box there, as if everybody that is poor or homeless or living on the street is because of like some, like some bad habit they have that by you giving them cash is keeping them from being able to, break that. Go ahead, Evan, first.
So in defense of Evan, he's exaggerating ever so slightly, because we do have provisions, and I have watched him give water to the homeless. I've watched him talk to homeless all the time. I've watched him give jobs to homeless and then give them money for the things that they're doing. So like there are things that he's doing. He's just not taking credit for it.
We've given housing to homeless people. We've done a lot of things, but if they're not willing to get to know us at all, if there's anyway, I'm not going to defend myself here on that. I think
I want to move this on anyway, but I mean, maybe another time we can talk about best practices when it comes to this kind of thing, because one of the things that we haven't been able to do as well now that we've been meeting virtually is highlighting different organizations here in Houston that are helping people that are on the margins in all kinds of ways. People that are coming out of human trafficking, people that are struggling with poverty, people that are hungry, homeless. And I miss being able to do that because it gives people an opportunity to see all the organizations in Houston that are helping those people. And so I think we can all at least agree that those organizations, many of them, maybe not all of them, are worthy of us giving our time and money to. And then if we could want to go above and beyond that, that's great. But I'm going to move us on for now. And I'm going to ask another. I already had this question teed up, but now things are a little hot under the collar. So maybe the way the person phrased this, not everybody's going to like, but I didn't make the question. The question is, this is leftover from last time, by the way. Can one be a pro-abortion Christian? Again, I didn't write the question. If you want to call it pro-choice, that's fine. But the person specifically wrote, when we were talking about how you can have these conversations and still get along, the issue of abortion came up, and this person asked the question and then was really bummed that we didn't get to it. So I told this person that we would do it this time. Can one be a pro-abortion Christian? Joseph, take us away.
I think my biggest gripe about these kind of questions is that everything seems, or not just these, just society in general, everything just seems to be, it has to be black or white. And there's so much complexity. And I mean, this is such a complex issue. So just to stand on for or against is almost too simplistic. And maybe that's why we want it, because it just makes easier for our life if we can just stand on it. Like, I mean, I am against abortion, absolutely. But at the same time, I also don't feel right to regulate someone's body. And so can a Christian be pro? And at the same time, people who are pro-life are also pro-death penalty and pro-war. So how is that pro-life? I mean, is it just pro-our life, which has been even, so to me, I think I can condemn and say, you know what, abortion is not the route. It's not. It's we should try to avoid it at all costs. But I also don't think it's my, especially as a man, to stand in front of a woman and say you can't do that to your body and whatnot. So the real quick answer to that question for me is yes, but also it's not a fair question because it's such a complex issue, and the more we try to simple it and water it down, the more we won't be able to have conversations and realize that, you know, not everything in the world is black and white. Most of it is a bunch of gray.
Yeah, it's funny. You picked up on a different part of the question to point out the gray versus the black and white. For me, the part of the question that I would reword if I could is can one be a Christian? I don't mind the term pro-abortion. I know what they're getting at, but you can be a lot of bad things and still be a Christian. So, and that's really between them and Jesus. You know what I mean? And you look at
also, is anyone really for abortion in of itself? No one's for. I feel like no one's for abortion. What we are for is a person to choose.
Sure.
How they, but like I don't think anyone is. Maybe I'm projecting.
Now, there are people that I think you could find at a rally somewhere that are, but let's count those as outliers. I want to push back on something that you said. So, but I had to set the terms first that I think you can believe a lot of wrong things and be a Christian. I think you can do a lot of wrong things and be a Christian. Thank goodness that's how all of us can be Christians, right? Because we're all full of sin and wickedness and rebellion. That being said, you said something like, of course, nobody wants abortion. We want to keep them at bay. We want there to be as few as possible. But who am I to stand in front of a woman and tell her what to do with her body? What are we saying to address the body that's inside? Because I don't, when I hear the term abortion, I know it involves the woman's body, but the first person I'm thinking about is the baby inside, which I am one of those people that thinks it's murder.
And I kind of push back too. A lot of people who tend to be, and forgive me for generalizing, so this is a complete generalization.
Generalize. Yeah.
A lot of people who are pro-abortion stop caring about the baby after it's born. Our foster system. My son is foster adopted, and the foster system is a mess. It is absolutely a mess, and too many Christians fight for the fetus, but not enough. I mean, we're pro, like, I mean, in the past year we were caging up kids. So like,
I entirely agree with you that there are so many pro-life people that aren't considering the complete life. That being said, it doesn't answer the question that I asked though. Like, because we agree, the foster system is a mess. There are so many more things we could be doing holistically to provide for the kind of women that would find them, not the kind of women that would find themselves in that kind of situation. Families, I mean, there's certain incentives that we could be providing. Agreed on all those fronts. But if it is murder, if it is a human life that we're taking, why is that not the question that we're first asking?
That's a very good question. I don't have an answer for it.
Well, I think that is also nuanced, right? Because then that gets into all kinds of things about like when life starts and all that business. And where I land on this is that we're not going to answer these questions. And I feel like we should all just accept that we're not all going to agree, and we're not going to be able to answer these questions in a way that makes everybody comfortable. And so, like, how do we, live in a world together where we can both exist? And that's what I think, like, I'm tired of having the same conversations and the same arguments over and over and over again about things like abortion and the death penalty. Because, I mean, we've been having them for how many years and have gotten, I wish everyone would just accept that we're not going to change the world. We're not going to change everyone's mind to one way or another. So, like, how do we create a world where we can all live together? And
okay,
then,
and I'm doing this partly because I know Evan might be thinking these same things, but he was the mean guy last time, so I'm being the mean guy this time. But you say that and it sounds lovely, and I do want us all to get along together. That's partly why we do this, right? But no one would ever say the same thing you just said about Nazi Germany. No one would be like, I don't know why we keep talking about this. Like, the Jews are going to die. Okay, that's just how it is. Like, we're just going to keep killing them. Like, there's at some point people took a stand and said this is wrong. Right? I mean, am I alone here tonight?
No,
I'm sure you're not. But I mean, I don't know that I appreciate the like analogy between,
Well, it's a question of what is worthy of life, or who is worthy of life, or what is a human. So I think the better
right,
American
but that's
analogy,
what I'm. Sorry, go ahead, Evan.
The better American analogy would be slavery, because there was a difference of opinion about who was a human being. In that case, it was people
in Nazi Germany, right? With Jews, that's
yeah. It was life unworthy of life. I don't remember the German, but yeah. So yeah, subhumans, and yeah. So I mean, yeah, And by the way, we did have a debate on the death penalty a while back, and even the Catholic and I was part of that. Even the Catholic that I was debating, he did not agree with even the Roman Catholic position that the death penalty and abortion are in the same moral category, because an innocent baby is not the same as someone convicted of a crime. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of the death penalty per se. I am, but it doesn't mean to say.
But let's not go there. Let's stay.
But also. And this is what just, if it is only about the innocent baby, then why aren't there other, why haven't there been other arenas explored for, what's the term? For preventing unwanted pregnancies, if that's why someone's aborting a baby. Obviously, like, if we take out the things that have to do with health issues and whatnot, which I think both people on both sides are usually willing to do.
Is your question, why aren't we kind of looking on the front end to see what we can do to help people not find themselves in that situation?
Like, should we
No.
sterilize?
Oh,
Yeah, like why I mean, why is it have to be about, regulating whether or not a woman can do something with her body? Why isn't the discussion like whether or not, men should be able to, like, vasectomies are reversible. So like why not, just make everyone have vasectomies until, you're ready to have a child. I am not advocating that.
sure.
I want to be clear, like that. I'm not saying that is an answer to the question. It's just, if it's just about the life of a child, then I mean, I feel like, the world hasn't done enough to explore ways, for us to move past this.
I agree. We agree about that. And I promise after this, I am not going to keep bogarting this conversation.
No one's answered the question yet. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, the question is, can you be a Christian? I think we've sussed out that, like, you can be a Christian and do a lot of bad things. Oh, and maybe we disagree about how bad this is, but is it right? Is, I think, kind of what the person's getting at. And we are trying to live lives that are growing closer and closer to the holiness that Christ wants for us. And if you think it's murder, and that's a big if, I don't think everybody here thinks that, but if you think it's murder, then it's wrong. It's just wrong. And so, yes, we need to do all of those preliminary things. We need to help people not get in that situation. We need to be pro-life all the way through life. But he doesn't get away from the fact that there is a human life being taken and that its personal liberties aren't protected, like we talk about in the Declaration of Independence. I think there's a really big problem with that. If we all of a sudden said, hey, listen, it's okay to murder people with red hair starting tomorrow, like, everybody here would be like, that's ridiculous. We have to protect the redheaded people in our life. We love them. They're people too. Oh my gosh, Joseph. Oh my goodness. But you get what I'm saying, right? We would never pick a particular people group and be like, that's okay. But we
My wife is a redhead. I'm getting offended. My wife is a redhead.
gotta go. I'm gonna be done now, but other people feel free to continue.
So just to answer the question, can one be a pro-abortion Christian? I think it's kind of a non-question, because if abortion is sin, then can you be a sinful Christian? And I would think the answer is yes. And if abortion is not sin, then can you be a pro-abortion Christian? The answer is yes. I don't think that it's really the question that's being asked here.
I'll agree about that.
The early church would say no, you cannot be a pro-abortion Christian. The early church has a pretty strong stance against, evident in both the Didache and most, not every single text that's ever been written. We don't know, but like tons of early texts from the early church that talk about killing the brephos, which is typically translated infant, inside you, or killing it by exposure after birth. Again, I'm taking for granted the concessions about the health of the woman's at stake, or all these different outlying situations. And I'm talking about the willful decision to terminate what's inside you because you just don't want it or whatever. The early church's ruling on that was what we would eventually call a mortal sin, sin that put the person's stance before God in jeopardy. So I would say at best you would be, according to the early church, you'd be in danger of putting your position before God in danger. That's the early church stance. In terms of kind of how I'd extrapolate from that, if you concede, as Sarah did, that abortion is murder, then I think the answer is straightforwardly no. You cannot be a pro-murder Christian. Because it's not just like having sin in your life, that's being for murder, and maybe even committing it. And I think the answer is clearly no. Now, of course, that's assuming Sarah's definition that abortion is murder. If we're not assuming that definition, we're arguing something else, then you have to answer the question differently. But if you're conceding the definition that Sarah gave is abortion murder, then I think the answer is obviously no. You cannot be a pro-murder Christian. I don't. It's a weird question. It's an obvious no.
Well, what do you think, Paul?
Well, just no one had answered the question yet. Everyone was talking about other stuff. So, besides Evan, but then we disagreed. So,
and then that would kind of follow Joe, that a lot of people that end up being pro-choice are not actually pro-abortion in that way. But I'm not misinterpreting you, Paul. I promise that the idea that there are plenty of pro-choice people out there that don't think that abortion is desirable would escape that kind of that idea of pro-murder, because they're not pro-murder. They think that there's another factor involved, and
Right.
they wish the abortion rate would decrease.
Yeah.
Being pro-choice for whatever other reasons. Okay, but so the other comment I wanted to make though is that often when this topic comes up, people do not respect the difference between the actual political narratives that are spun versus policies that Christianity would actually endorse biblically. And I think that plenty of people could say that the Republican Party is not the beacon of biblical pro-life positions, and that's fine. And I would think that many Republicans would say, like, yeah, like there's plenty of things where I wish we could be better pro-life, and they'd argue in between on how do you do it would do this. But those are often the straw men used against us. And then I want to also say that there are a lot of political organizations that do not make the same mistakes that liberals often accuse of pro-life conservatives. So these are definitely liberal organizations, but I'm thinking of Democrats for the Life of America and Secular Whole Life. Both of these groups claim to have all of they end up being anti-death penalty as well as anti-abortion. And this group makes up about 21 million of the Democrats that are actually that actually register to vote. So I don't know if they actually vote, but they do. It's 21 million registered Democrats that will also talk about how they're pro-life. They're still voting Democrat for other reasons. It's just a very complicated issue when you look at it from a broad spectrum.
Sure.
If you would like to be pro-life and also anti-death penalty, that is still an option. Like don't feel limited by a two-party system in this way where you have to fit a very simple name.
I would just tie this back to our previous conversation though about the poor. If it is the case that God does have this kind of preferential option, or he's looking for the most vulnerable, I don't know why we wouldn't put the unborn in that camp. So I think if we're going to be consistent, we need to defend the lives of the unborn, because they can't speak for themselves. And that's what we heard about the poor. They can't defend themselves or speak for themselves. There was something else I was going to say. It might come back to me and I'll come back. I apologize. I forgot.
Well, I'm just everybody other than me, and nobody else but me has actually said whether they think abortion is murder or not. And I'm not going to make everybody say it, like go around the circle. But does anyone agree with
abortion is murder?
Abortion is murder.
Okay. No problem saying this. Okay.
And again,
no problem saying it.
Again, like, putting in the same caveats that Paul did, ethical dilemmas and, health of the mother and things like that, which are very, very rare. And when people bring those sorts of things up, it's less than 1% of abortions. If you don't, if anyone ever like to go to the Houston Women's Clinic with me sometime on San Jacinto and talk to people on their way to get an abortion, let me know. I'll show you. Haley, you're invited anytime. Why do you make that face? I mean, seriously. I mean, these are real people on their way to go into an abortion clinic.
Speaking of, I've been there. I've taken people. I know what it's like. And I've shielded people as they walked into these places from people who were trying to talk to them on their way in. So yeah.
So speaking of taking scripture out of context, there was also another story that's always fascinated me. Is in Numbers chapter 5, where a woman if she has an adulterous affair, and she's pregnant, the priest carries out a miscarriage, like purposely. The priest causes a miscarriage by having her. Someone might want to check. It's the last half of Numbers chapter 5. Let me get my Bible so I don't sound like an idiot.
I'll be your fact checker live.
All right, give me a second.
Let me just throw this in real fast too. The other thing I was going to say is we love to talk about the beauty of James, where he talks about true religion is caring for the widow and orphan. Well, if an unwanted by their parents' child who's about to be aborted is not an orphan, I don't know who is. So if we love James, is that 1 or 2? Anyway, if we love, I think
There's
it's
only one
127.
James
thing.
1.
No, is it James chapter 1 or 2? Is it? I think it's 127,
James
right?
1.
Okay. So if we love that verse, then I think we should most definitely be against abortion. I think that would make, if that is what is true religion, I think the answer would definitely be no to the question. But Numbers 5, sorry.
This is not. I'm just bringing it up because I remembered. It's Numbers chapter 5, starting. It's the whole second half, but starting verse 20. It says, "But if you had an affair while married to your husband, if you have defiled yourself, and a man other than your husband had intercourse with you, then the priest must make the woman utter the curse and say to the woman, 'May the Lord make you a curse and a harmful pledge among your people when the Lord induces a miscarriage in your womb discharges. And may the water that brings these curses into your stomach and make your womb discharge and make you miscarry.' And the woman will say, 'I agree, I agree.'" Just for funsies, that's there too.
Funsies indeed. Paul, save us. I don't know what to do with this passage. We may have to.
I don't either. It just popped in my head, so I'm sorry.
No, this could have been somebody's answer to the icebreaker question for sure. Mine doesn't say miscarriage, but it's not a great picture either way.
What does yours say?
Mine says, Lord make you a curse and an oath among people. When the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your body swell, this does not sound attractive. May this water that brings the curse pass into your bowels and make your womb swell and your thigh fall away. I wish my thighs would fall away. I don't think that's what this is getting at, though.
Anyone just tuning in right now is going to be so disturbed and probably click away as quickly as possible.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry
The
for the
Bible is not a
detour.
children's book.
Paul, do you have any thoughts on this? Because otherwise we may have to put this as a question for our next one, because we cannot leave people hanging forever on this Numbers 5 business. Thanks a lot, Joe. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Sure. Well, of course, no one mentioned the Old Testament, so no one was taking scripture out of context. I mentioned the early church.
What?
But in Numbers 5:27, he says, when he's made her drink the water, it'll come about that if she has defiled herself through impure sexual relations and has been unfaithful to her husband, the water which brings the curse will go into her and cause bitterness. Her abdomen will swell, and then it says her thigh will waste away. So this is again one of the, and that's in both the Hebrew and Greek. The Greek translation of it translates it straightforwardly as it
That's a terrible time.
doesn't translate the metaphor. So if it's the thigh, for example, is a metaphor for like her abdomen or her womb or something, it is then translated in the Greek not as, it doesn't translate the idiom, it just translates it literally as her thigh or her abdomen. So it doesn't mention the sort of fetus or whatever we would call it, or whatever they would call it, I would say. It just mentions that her abdomen or thigh would wither. It could be that her thigh is a metaphor for her womb in the same way that feet is a metaphor for genitalia. So that if it mentions her thigh, that could be a metaphor for her womb. It doesn't mention this. If this is a Hebrew idiom that I'm just unaware of, that could very well be the case. So if you're a Hebrew scholar or a Greek scholar reading this, or an OT scholar, like an OT specialist on Numbers 5, and I'm wrong, I'm happy for you to prove me wrong. But it simply doesn't say she will miscarry. It says her thigh will waste away. So it may be claiming that her womb will deteriorate or something like that, so that her capacity to conceive will give way. I don't know, but there's no statement here that she'll miscarry, unless this is a Hebrew idiom that I'm unaware of, which could be the case.
I'm going to move on. Sorry, I got a little distracted from a very strange comment on Facebook, which I think is a scam. Later. I'm going to move us on. We have a question about a New Testament, maybe it'll be a little bit easier passage that came in from somebody today, and it goes something like this. In Matthew 13, Jesus tells the parable of the sower, or the parable of the soil. Seed is scattered and some falls on rocky, thorny, worn, or good soil. This parable confuses the disciples, so they ask for clarification. And Jesus says, quote, "This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." And that's the end of the quote. So the person's question is, so are parables meant to make things clearer or to confuse his audience? Why would Jesus tell parables that are not clear in their meaning? So again, I won't read the whole thing again, but the person's basically saying it sounds like Jesus is making it seem like parables are meant to be sort of confusing. Are they?
Yeah, potentially. In Mark 4, he says that he says I tell parables so that the people would be confused and become hardened. Whereas in Matthew 13, it's a little softer. He says I tell them parables because they are hardened. So that in Matthew, it seems that the hardening precedes the hardened state of the hearers precedes the fact that he tells parables. So that his telling of parables is because they're already in a confused state and he's trying to make things simpler. Whereas in Mark 4, he says, I tell them parables so that they will become hardened or whatever. So a few things to note there. In Mark 4, when he says, I tell them parables so that, etc. In Greek, it's called what's called a hina clause. So in Greek, he says hina, and then he uses the verb case. So it could be that the telling of the parables is for the purpose that they become hardened. However, some have pointed out that Mark actually occasionally misuses that preposition, or not preposition, misuses that particle. And when he says hina, sometimes he actually means a different word, which is hati, which is simply that or because. So it could be that Mark himself also is saying that Jesus tells parables because the people are hardened. In either, now the probability is that Mark is saying that he tells them so that they'll become hardened. Grammatically, that's the probability. I think this relates to Isaiah 6, where Isaiah 6 views the people as already disobedient. So because in Isaiah 6, the people in chapters 1 through 5, the people of Israel have already been shown to be disobedient and under God's judgment because of their covenant infidelity. That's basically the key theme of chapter 5. So that in chapter 6, Isaiah is given a mission to go speak to the people and to actually harden them so that they will become fit for the imminent judgment that is about to fall upon them. So that their hardening and Isaiah's ministry to them to harden them is itself already the judgment because of their previous disobedience. So that in other words, hardening is a punishment itself. And that it seems that Jesus in Mark 4 seems to be doing the same thing, that the disobedience of the people of Israel is already taken for granted, not for all time and in all places, but just in the generation that Jesus is dealing with. That's evident in Mark 2 and 3, where they see that they get mad at Jesus for like healing on the Sabbath, and they want to go kill Jesus because of that. So he then judges the people as, okay, they're disobedient. So then it says in Mark 4, he's basically enacting Isaiah's ministry over again. He's making the people hardened and ready for judgment. And then the twist then is that he then takes the judgment upon himself on the cross.
It's a good
enabling them on the other side of that to actually be open to receiving the announcement about Christ's activity. That's how I read it. More could be said, I'm sure. Go read Richard Hayes. Richard Hayes has a good interpretation of it.
I always thought something more simple of just that if Jesus told people, like, some of you are rocky soil and like it's not going to work for you, you suck, that wouldn't get along very well with these people. And so he intentionally tells this parable so that it ends up dodging some of the issue.
Right, but that quote, but what he says, because they're hardened, is a quotation of Isaiah 6. That's why I'm reading.
Okay.
So that's just a quotation straight out of Isaiah 6.
Where does the idea of like the messianic secret come into this? And maybe it doesn't, but this idea that there's this sort of slow roll progression of Jesus kind of rolling out his plan, and he doesn't want too much to be known at the beginning, and then as he gets closer and closer to the cross, he makes it more and more apparent who he is and what he's about. Is that maybe a piece of what's happening here too?
That's going on in Mark. Yeah, in Mark he's
Paul,
more cagey about his identity, and when people know it or recognize it, he doesn't want them to talk about it. And I think it's because Jesus is aware that a broad awareness of his messiahship will get him killed, and he is biding his time and knows when he wants that to happen, aka at the Passover.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? That was a really good breakdown, Paul.
Can I just ask a question? It doesn't necessarily need an answer, but one of the things that I often hear today about Jesus, or it's assumed about Jesus, is that his entire ministry is to, like, I don't know, bring people together, or I don't know, something nice where we're all like unified or something. And I don't know that I see that in his ministry. He talks about people being in and out, being excluded by virtue, for example, of these parables. Now, maybe they are excluded by their own rebellion. I don't know if they're excluded because he's excluded them. But I guess one of my concerns is that sometimes we make Jesus into something he's not. I don't know.
But I also think that's fair. I mean, that's, like people will say, we all do that. We all project something that we want onto the Jesus figure. And somehow, I mean, no one has a clear picture of Jesus. I will fight you to death on that. And when people accuse me of picking passages and whatnot, we all pick and choose. Every single one of us looks at the Bible and picks and choose, and maybe not picks and choose, give certain parts more attention than others. So yeah, I think there is a part of us that does return their favorite and make Jesus into our idols. But I mean, being from California, when I moved from California to Texas, I found out being left center in California and here in Pearland means I'm like a flaming liberal. But never did I ever think people who were pursuing a journey in faith thought that Jesus was just being a kumbaya guy. Mm-hmm. And the harshest, but also the harshest words that Jesus had, the woes and whatnot, were always directed toward the people who should have known better but didn't. And he seemed to show care and love to those very religious folks excluded, right? Like the lepers and the sick and whatnot. So I lost my train of thought, but I don't know if we're all in agree. Like, I don't know if my friends would say, oh yeah, Jesus was just trying to make sure that we're all just nice and cool and like hippie and laid back dudes. I think a lot of us leftist people, and again generalizing, would rather sees Jesus as saying, let's down with the man, let's overthrow the man and build a new system that is more equitable, equal or something like that. So more let's be an anarchist than let's just get along and hold hands and sing Kumbaya by the fireplace.
No, that's a good word. I like it. I am going to move us on with this. I'm going to try to squeeze one, maybe two more questions in before we're done. Eek. We shall see. Okay. This person says, I listened to the self-care podcast. This is a podcast we did a few months ago. And it was mentioned in passing that the Enneagram isn't something that should be used in churches. What do you all think about that? And I think this is interesting because we just today put out part 1 of a 2-part podcast, little mini series about Christian mysticism, the Enneagram, Richard Rohr, all of that. So you can even hear more about that if you check out our podcast that came out today. But yeah, Joe.
I have a question. I've also heard someone else recently say that the Enneagram is not good, and I'm still from the Myers-Briggs generation.
Yes.
So can someone explain to me what is it? Kind of like how some churches view yoga, that's not yoga. Christians shouldn't engage in yoga. Is that kind of same argument, or why is Enneagram so scary for some?
Yeah, to put it quickly, but again, listening to the podcast would give you we have people that are way more experts than I am, but I think its roots are super questionable. It originally people thought it was like, super ancient and went back to all these like thousands of years ago, but it doesn't. And the original roots of it were built on kind of lies and maybe some demonic activity with like channeled listening, automatic writing. The guy who wrote the Enneatypes, there's a clip of him on our podcast saying that he used like automatic channeling of the spirits to write them. And there's never been any real kind of like peer-reviewed scholastic evidence that there's anything really to it psychologically. It's just something that, anyway, so it was really big in the New Age movement for a long time. And then it's just very almost recently come into the church. and people have written about Christianity and the Enneagram. And so, yes, there are a fair number of people that think it's the new age brought into the church and we need to be really careful about it. And other people are like, but you can still use it, you know?
I think the Myers-Briggs is still just like a rough estimate. Like it's
say that what?
The Myers-Briggs is even still a rough estimate. I don't even know.
How dare you?
Okay, Joe, I'm an ENFJ. What are you?
INFJ.
ENTPs for the win.
I have no idea what all of those letters means, and if that's supposed to be helpful in understanding others.
Thank you for making me feel old, Haley. Thank you.
Whatever Haley's letters are, mine are the opposite.
Oh my God.
Yeah, probably.
Haley, I know neither my letters nor my Enneagram.
Well, then you're definitely going to heaven.
That wasn't like I'm in. I'm just saying, like, I'm with you, Haley. I don't know. What is this? I don't know.
But to the question, I think it depends on the church and the people, right? Like, I don't see. I know so many fellow pastors who lead the church in these things, and it's been helpful to the people in how they approach their faith in God. So I can see good in that, but it's like that Paul passage. If it's not going to work for your church, it's not worth the fight. But if you think it's going to be helpful, I don't know. That feels like a cop out too.
Well, up until 2 seconds ago, you didn't know what the problem was with it, so we will allow a temporary cop out. That's okay.
Yeah, I've tried to read a couple of the things. Obviously, I don't know what all y'all put on the podcast business. I might go watch that. The couple of articles that I tried to read about why the Enneagram was bad, I don't know that I could like really give credence to what I was reading. So I don't know, maybe I need to get somebody else to send me some things like that you have, like from a more trusted source or someone who I trust, like, if you think it's credible. But my kind of thought in general is that it's very and I haven't done the Enneagram. A lot of my people, all of my friends have, they know their numbers and all those things. When I worked at Chapelwood, that's a huge Berkman church, which if you're not familiar with Berkman is, the guy that wrote it was a member of Chapelwood, which is probably why they're a Berkman church. But all of these things are so incredibly similar. Strength Finder, Berkman, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, all of the personality things, all about trying to give us language to help understand others, right? And people who might be similar to us and people that might be different. I mean, even the 5 love languages, right? It's all about, and in a way, I think a lot of that stuff is great because I do think it does end up helping. I learned a lot about working with my team at Chapelwood after we each went through the Berkman process, and learned things about each other. I mean, Berkman is very detailed. It'll do all kinds of stuff because you have to answer literally like 500 questions about different scenarios and ranking things and whatnot. So it was a very involved process, but and pretty accurate, at least for me. The only danger that I really feel like comes with some of this stuff is that it tends to put all of us in boxes, which I think we do enough of in the world. But do I think it's dangerous to have in the church? No, because, and like I said, I haven't read anything I feel is credible to explain why it's dangerous. But everyone that I know that uses Enneagram are Christians, and they do it like alongside with their faith. It's not something that's like, I don't know, they're not like worshiping the Enneagram. It's a part of reflection and contemplative prayer and understanding, again, of like self and others. And that's another thing that I could go on for forever, because I do think this is even part of my little bio on our website, which is a plug for HoustonTOT.com. I hope that's right. Is that the website? Okay, cool. I feel like I was created in God's image, and I feel that learning more about myself helps me to learn more about the nature of God. And same with others. I feel like God created Sarah and even Evan McClanahan, and that I can learn more about God by learning more about you. And if the Enneagram or the Berkman or the Myers-Briggs or whatever the thing helps me do that, then why is that a bad thing? Yeah, no one has given me any reason to think otherwise.
We could talk about this for a really long time, and I actually find it very fascinating, and you probably already can deduce what I think. But we had a kind of a close to the heart question come in that I want to end on. So I'm going to do this. If you want to know more about the whole Enneagram thing and make a decision for yourself, I really do highly recommend, and you can just listen. You don't have to watch. You can do it while you're driving. The podcast that aired today is about that. It's about Christian mysticism, the Enneagram, Richard Rohr, and it's got two experts who wrote a book about this, kind of warning to the church. And you can, and again, there is video footage of some of the people that like actually wrote the Enneatypes and brought it into kind of modernity that you can listen to them talk on their own. So I'll let you guys make your own decision about that. And it's another plug for Theology on Air, which you can listen on any podcast platform. But here's the last, what I want to end on. And I don't know that I quite understand which way this person means this, but there's a sweetness to it that I think would be a nice way to end. So the question is, this came in tonight. Does God prefer we share with him our honest disbelief or our desire to believe? So I don't know if this person is making a dichotomy of it's one of those two, or if they're just saying, does he want to hear about either of those? Does God prefer we share with him our honest disbelief or our desire to believe? Again, we'll have to.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would say yes.
Go. Yes.
Also yes.
So I grew up in a context where if you're doubting, you're not a good Christian. You're only struggling because you're not believing hard enough. So just pray harder and go to church more and read the Bible more and give more money to the church. It wasn't my dad, because my dad was the pastor, but it was our Sunday school, my youth group, whatever. And that did a number on me, because you have these questions that are unanswerable, and so then you feel like you're doubting, and then you're not a good Christian, because then God hates you now because you're doubting. But like Peter doubted. There's some great people in the Bible who doubted. I would even say Jesus, maybe not doubt, but questioned at one point in the Garden of Gethsemane, like, if there's another way.
Yeah.
Hint, hint, Dad. I don't know why, if there's something that we struggle with and there's some disbelief in that, I don't think that excludes us from being God's child. I think that helps us even more. And I think God is bigger than our doubts. And the best thing to do is find a person, a leader in faith, who doesn't try to tell you all the answers, but will walk with you in discovering the answers. And I was told, never trust a person who claims that they have the truth, but trust the person who pursues it. And in that kind of sense, like, if someone has all the answers for you, if someone has all the answers, then what's the point of faith? The faith implies that we're not supposed to have all answers. And so our desire to believe, our honest disbelief, yes, I think God wants, there's that U2 song, I can't remember what it's called, I want everything you have and nothing that you are not. So I just feel that God wants everything that we are and nothing that we are not. And so if doubting and disbelief comes with it, I think God just wants you. And hopefully you will be surrounded with people to help you wrestle with that. And wrestling with scripture, wrestling with questions is okay. I don't know when we became so afraid of asking questions and wrestling with faith. It's a common, Israel means you wrestled with God and human and have won. So like, wrestling is okay. And so I'll let someone else chime in.
No, I think that's beautiful. I think this is partly why we do this, right? So that people can bring these kind of questions and any question. It's partly why we want people to be able to do it anonymously, so they can just say whatever they're really feeling. And it feels like half the Bible is people having gripe with God, right? It's like Jeremiah and Lamentations and half the Psalms and Job and yeah, more and more. But yeah, Paul, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Joseph said, but also to obviously Thomas gives this perfect voice in John 20 when he says, like, Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief. I mean, he admits quite openly the fact that he's struggling, but he wants help in his unbelief and wants God to help him in that, and he wants to believe, right? So actually, I think this is a really interesting quote that I'm gonna read, but I'm guessing people, unless you already know it, won't be able to guess who says it. So he says, when we stress that faith ought to be certain and secure, we don't have in mind a certainty without doubt or a security with any anxiety. Rather, we affirm that believers have a perpetual struggle with their own lack of faith and are far from possessing a peaceful conscience, never interrupted by any disturbance. On the other hand, we want to deny that they'll ever fall out of mercy. Anyone want to guess who wrote that?
Knowing you, it was N.T. Wright. I don't know.
Nope.
Augustine. Jesus.
John Calvin. So I use that one because Calvin's usually the whipping boy for like the kind of the jerk, right? But like, I think this is to echo Joseph's point. This is a strong tradition in historic Christianity that doubts are not in and of themselves some sort of wrinkle in one's sort of position before God. So anyway.
No, I think this is all very well said. We could say more, but we are sadly.
Wait, I have to make a contrarian point.
Oh my gosh.
I'm hanging up.
I doubt.
Okay, very, very quickly. I do think that there is, though, in the evangelical church, there's a kind of coolness to doubt that I don't like. It's one thing to express what? It's true.
No, I totally agree, and I'm laughing
yeah,
at my.
There's like these sermon series about doubt and how like people encourage it. I'm like, no, we don't encourage doubt. There's a difference between like encouraging doubt and like, God, help me in my unbelief. Those are different things. And so I think that it's almost like it's cool to not really commit to like doubt or something. And I'm not down with that. Be faithful. Like, be faithful. Ask questions if you have to, but be faithful.
Is it more, I'm sorry to interrupt, is it more promoting doubt or more promoting ask questions? Because those are two different things.
No, I agree. Like when you describe your childhood or like fundamentalist churches, I'm not on board with that at all. I'm all about asking questions. I think we should encourage children to ask every question they can ever come up with. I'm thinking more though when you're a 20, 30 something year old and if there's any way in which the church is just kind of like, well, doubt is good. I don't think doubt is good.
Maybe a better word would be it's like an essential part, but it's something you're trying to move past.
Yeah, yes. I think it's something that it's not a mortal sin, but it's not something like we should want to be stuck with forever. We should be moving toward complete faith in Christ.
So the thing that I've noticed in, I think the reason why we're afraid of doubt is because we're such an answer-based society. Like we're like our education is based upon standardized testing, and you have to, and even like it's ridiculous because my son is autistic and he's still expected to do the STAR and he can't read, and it's just all this mess. And anyway, but it's part of this thing where we're so obsessed with answers. And I just feel like the Jesus and the Hebrew tradition is more obsessed with questions, right? Like I was told when a rabbi and a disciple talk, the rabbi understands how much disciples knows, not by the answers that they give, but by the questions that they ask. So a rabbi asks a question, the disciples ask a question response, and then the rabbi, it's kind of like someone says, hey, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus responds, well, what do you say is the greatest commandment? And so that I always feel is missing in a lot of churches. We are afraid to ask questions, and pastors are afraid to say I don't know, because that may make us seem like we're the resident theologians, so it makes us seem like we're not doing our job, we're not doing what we're getting paper, so we'll come up with answers that are more harmful than whatnot. So is doubt good? Is it healthy? I think asking questions and continuing having people to ask questions is a vital part of faith that is missing in and I don't want to just say evangelical culture, but like in Christianity in of itself, particularly American Christianity, like we should continue to keep asking questions, and oftentimes that leads to doubt, but oftentimes that leads to a deeper sense of faith too. So
guys, we really do have to shut this down, because I tell people that we're going to honor their time, and we end at 9. It's already 9:04. We've sinned against you by 4 minutes, but I know but God is merciful, so it's good. A couple of quick announcements, and then I'm going to pray us out. Haley mentioned the website, but definitely go check it out. In fact, I'm probably going to change it tonight or tomorrow so that the top podcast is the one from today. So if you want to listen to it, that's an easy place to find it. HoustonTOT.com, HoustonTOT.com. And then definitely check out our upcoming Theology on Tap, which is themed about miracles, with Craig Keener, who is a rock star in the field. And but we'll still be having this kind of big group discussion where you get to send in your questions. So that is December 16th, which is not a Tuesday. We're breaking from tradition. December 16th is a Wednesday. Put it on your calendar, mark it, join us. I think those are all the announcements. And if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to pray, and then we will say goodnight. Sound good? Father, thank you for being a God that welcomes our questions. Thank you for giving us this community where we can ask questions, and we don't always have to have the answers, but you delight in us just wanting to know you more and to be like you. Help us to do that. Help us to continue knowing you more, being more like you, and then taking the truth of your love and your grace out into the world. Help us to be bold with our faith. Help us to be authentic. Help us to be loving, especially to those that are on the margins, because you do talk about that, and we want to follow in your way. God, help us to be faithful even in our doubt. And thank you for all of this, and for loving us, and for sending your son to die so that we don't have to be perfect. We can be far from perfect, but if we say yes to your free gift of salvation and forgiveness, we can have hope and peace and joy forever. Thank you for that. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.